Eowthwick, Autumn 914. Does it look to you like the army has grown? Osrith's question, the next morning, having rested at a village called Hudras, was to both Ælfrith and Aldhelm. Both men peered down from the higher ground that Osrith's company were following. Aldhelm looked southwest. In amongst the banners of the Northmen, near the back of the column of men fluttered many standards that Osrith recognized, the Red Hand. This was an Ullaid banner, one which Domhnall Uineel had flown when the Norse attacked the monastery at Doiire. It would appear so, he said, grimly. I wonder whether they have not collected men on the way. Do you know anything, Irian? Donchada and Ragnall were meant to have an alliance, Osrith added. Perhaps I can help there, Ælfrith told her. And whether Aldhelm knew or not, he was going to hear anyway. The king of the north, Donchada of the Uineel, Osrith clarified. Ælfrith nodded. Donchada of the Uineel had a pact with Ragnall and with Sigtryggr to live in certain areas along the east coast of Irian. Often, they would receive attacks from the Irish, which Donchada would attempt to stop, but when more Norse and Danes arrived, they pushed further west. And so the alliance broke down, Aldhelm finished, keen to get to the point. And the Uineel long wanted freedom from the Norse. Donchada and Ragnall's alliance fell. That was interesting, how much Aldhelm knew, and she stayed silent, waiting for the man to tell her some more information that he shouldn't really know, and would make Ethelfled angry if she knew Osrith knew. And the Red Hand? She hoped it was merely representative of the Irish, and that Domhnall was not down there with Ragnall. Surely not, Osrith thought. He would never have condoned what Bryder had done. Domhnall, Osrith thought, her friend, and little Neil Grubbyknees. Were they at Donchada's displeasure? Were they amongst the Irish with Ragnall? Surely not, they would surely go to Constantine first. He agreed to the installation of Sigtryggr and Stjora, as Uther told you, Aldhelm added, carefully, pulling Osrith out of her thoughts. And it was widely known that Ragnall was set on conquering surrounding Northumbrian territories. Ethelfled agreed to let him pass into Northumbrian up the Merse. So that was it, a pre-arranged alliance with the Ivasan brothers. Uhtred's scheme, no doubt, bringing an army for his disposal not 100 miles away from Bibbenberg. Only, I am guessing, Osrith replied, slowly, as she watched the men ride on, entertaining themselves with whatever game they were playing by counting the Norse. The lady did not bank on Ragnall attacking Seaster or Eadspirig. In fact, the longer she thought about it, the more it made sense. If Constantine knew all of the facts, which he surely did, he would be pleased that Dyfnwil and Caeligwylid's armies were to head south. Eswi, no doubt, would get a message to him in any case. And, apart from the attacks in her territory, to get Ragnall as an ally would be a huge achievement for Ethelfled. But it would, too, be a turning point for Alba, for an ally south of the wall would make it the work of a moment to take and hold Bernicia. Bibbenberg was small fry compared to the ancient land of the Idings, from the Forth to the Humber, which they had taken from Pitland, and at Bibbenberg, Wiher would probably continue not caring who ruled what beyond his walls. So, who are the Irish? Asked Osrith, suddenly. If Donchada has been successful in the Norse expulsion, his enemies. Please don't say Neil, or Domhnall, she begged silently. What of poor Gormlath? Ancient memories, safely stored, were scattering themselves around Osrith's memory. The UNA copyright hill have yielded hostages. The Ullaid had fallen and have wasted no time in organizing themselves as mercenaries for Ragnall, Aldhelm told her. She glanced down at the winding army. So they were Ullaid. Donchada, under the Uineels, had finally claimed all of the territory of Irian, including to the northeast of the island. Then they owned half of the country now. King Malmuir's first husband, would have been overjoyed. He is not the first unifying king in these islands, Osrith told Aldhelm, as the land dipped slowly downwards. Alfred, she clarified. Alfred, Aldhelm agreed. But others have claimed it off of Mercia, for one. But she was not the only person to be thinking about Ireland just then. Just then, Finan was also looking at Ragnall's line. and was thinking about his brother. 88,888,888. It was her mistake. In the end, it had happened on the afternoon of the next day when they had stormed a weaker part of the line just outside Eoferwick. A stupid mistake, but it had delayed the line. That much was clear. The bishops were roused, Sigtryg was alert, and the city gates were barred. Her men had fought valiantly, and had retreated, as Osrith wanted, around a corner and up onto a hill. Osrith would have got there too, except that her horse had thrown a shoe, and was staggering. Elfkin and Elfrith were riding back as 3 Norse were chasing her, and Osrith decided to abandon her horse and run to them, run as fast as she possibly could, towards the shouts of encouragement in 3 languages. It was not enough. From the side of her face Osrith could see an axe coming towards her, and she threw herself into the mud. Horses whinnied, and that was the last thing she could remember. It was dark, where she was, dark and cold. A small window at the top of where she was not betraying sunlight, so Osrith assumed it must be night time. She was alive, at any rate, and did not appear to be hurt. She got to her feet. A brief look round told her she was alone. So, alive, unhurt, alone. At Eoferwick, who could say? It was the only sizable settlement near where they had harried the line. But they must have had some success, hadn't they? All was quiet. That meant, either the city held, under Sigtryg and Stjora, or Agnol had unequivocally succeeded in ousting his brother, their household, their staff and any Christians within Eoferwick. She would have to watch, and wait, and listen. The language would be the key here. It didn't take long for Osrith to find out. Weak, autumn sunlight infiltrated the close-packed bars of the cell, and with it, snippets of sentences, phrases drifting down to her like falling leaves. Norse with some Gaelish. The expelled Ullaid were in the city's main square and were keeping guard at various points. A rattle to the door made Osrith jump out of her thoughts, and she turned to see an ironclad oak door open. Here, the man said to her, in Norse, "May you avoid eating the poison within it." Osrith took some steps to the door, and bent her head to the tin plate which the man had placed on the floor. Some rank-smelling meat invaded her nostrils, but she scooped up the plate anyway, for she knew she would have to eat as much as she could. "What did you say?" Osrith asked, in English, hoping to give the impression she knew no Norse. "Our Lady Brida sends you food," the man said, and looked slowly towards the meat. Osrith made to pick at it, away he was still looking at her. Then, she looked at him. "May you give my thanks to Lady Brida," Osrith told him, in English, "and I congratulate her victory." And, speaking of victory, she still had how was it that she still had her sword? As she bent her head to begin to eat, she heard the door creak, and then hurried steps crossing the dank straw. "No!" the man shouted, as he dashed the plate away. "No, bad meat." Osrith jumped, no longer playing a role, at the violence of the gesture. The man stood back and looked at the floor. Already starving rodents were boldly scurrying towards it. "Bad meat?" Osrith repeated. Then, she hung her head, acting again. "Is Brida going to starve me?" But the man had already taken a few steps back. He made to say, but stopped, for there was a blade at his back. "Starve you?" came a voice she knew. "I would never starve a Krejikvind." Brida, dark hair in braids, pronouncing the words in Danish very clearly, stepped out from behind the man, sword point still towards him, working it round to his chest. "Guthric, you are a poor guard," she told him, looking up to the man and narrowing her eyes. "You told the prisoner about the poison." "No," Guthric exclaimed. "I did not, Lady Brida," he exclaimed. But this seemed to infuriate her more. "You stopped the prisoner from eating the poison," she told the hapless Guthric. "You gave in to mercy. She was not Krejikvind to you then, so you have no excuses." And with as much thought as a chef might give a joint of meat, Brida pushed her sword into the man's chest. Osrith watched in horror at the apparent casualness of it all. Guthric did not bleed a good deal, but he slumped where he stood. He looked at Osrith as he fell, and his open eyes were still on her as he stopped moving. "Brida!" Osrith exclaimed. She was in no mood to pretend. This was a woman who had cut off the private parts of a priest to get back at his father. She had just executed a guard and seemed indifferent to this act. Bryda looked at Osrith, her face expressionless, but she did lower her sword. "I was once in the same position that you are now in," Bryda said to Osrith. "Not the same," Osrith told her, hoping with a shared memory, the suggestion of compassion that Bryda was showing her, where the Cymric showed her none, that she might provoke some sort of shared empathy. "Not the same," Bryda repeated. "My men did not mean to miss. But, you are alive, and may be valuable to me." She glanced up to the grating. "We took the city 3 days ago. Or rather, Sigtryggr fled." Stjora. Bryda broke off. "Men are searching for her, and her brats." And, she broke off again, and looked at Osrith's stomach. "You had your child, did you not?" "I did," Osrith told her. "Good," she thought to herself, "more connection." "A son." "He is not with me." "And yourself, Bryda?" The woman, who had not taken her eyes off Osrith, flickered the corner of her mouth. "I have twin daughter," she told Osrith, and then she took a few steps towards her, over the straw, and the corpses of 2 unfortunate mice who had chosen to sample the food. "You are to come with me, Osrith," she told her, still in Danish, "for I have a prophecy to tell." A prophecy? And Osrith was immediately transported back to Dunham, nearly 30 years before, where Skade, a supposed seer, had been imprisoned. Skade, who had targeted Utad, had ensnared his life by whispering prophecies to him, had been no match for Bryda, who has scoffed at her words. But now, even looking at the woman who had freed her, and who Osrith had freed, she might even see some of the foretelling madness in Bryda's face. Her stomach rumbled. Had she really been in the cell for 3 days? Best play along with Bryda, if it meant she would get back out. "Come with me, Osrith of Alba," Bryda called to her, her voice sing-songy and light, as if calling her name was part of what she was doing. "Come with me, to the throne room. Witness my power." Osrith did, although when she looked back at that time in her mind, she would remember that it felt like her legs were moving on their own, without Osrith commanding that they should. And she followed her, past the dead guard and through the oak door, along a torchlit passageway where warriors deferred to Bryda by inclining their heads to the floor. And all the time Osrith could think only of the self-induced madness that Skade had invoked, and that had cost Sigurd Bloodair and other powerful Danish and Norse warlords their lives. And another thing, as they ascended the stone steps of what Osrith was increasingly suspecting was the dungeon of Eofuic's stone hall, the hush, the quiet. Not even the footsteps of warriors, nor the pervasion of voices got to Osrith's ears. It didn't take long for her to realize why. They were in the hall, and the silence belied just the sheer number of people that it held. People were packed into the space with little or no room to move. At the front were ranged Norse and Gaels alike, their shields before them, their swords biscabarded. Some, who were guarding the closed front doors of the hall, held spears taller than they were. And, in front of the warriors, near the center of the hall, were 2 chairs, thrones perhaps. Had they once been Stjora and Sigtrygg's? Where were they now? Utad's daughter, and Ragnall's brother. "Come in, called a voice from just behind the thrones. And it took a moment for Osrith to realize that it was talking to her. Taking a few faltering steps, the lack of food for some days taking its toll, she tried to hold herself as upright as possible, chin high, shoulders back. What had Bryda brought her here for? Osrith glanced back, and then realized that Bryda was not beside her. Indeed, the woman commander had now made her way to the center of the hall, defined by even more warriors, and stood beside the thrones, looking at them. Warily, Osrith was not sure, or calculatingly. It was clear one was meant for her and the other, Ragnall, and, sure enough, the Norse leader stood beside the other throne. He caught Bryda's eye, and the woman's lips turned up at the corners again. Was this their coronation? And then Ragnall began to talk to Osrith again, stepping forward of the throne and holding out a hand. "Welcome, welcome," he declared in Norse. "Osrith of Alba, of Mercia, of wherever she is at the moment." A hearty laugh filled the hall, and Osrith stopped walking. She had been allowed to keep Bué for a reason, Come join us, have no fear. Ragnall continued. I have no fear, Osrith told him, and it was almost true. There seemed something unnatural about the gathering, something strange. But she carried on walking nonetheless.